This is Gabriela on the scene today with Talk Network Radio. We have a real treat for you just around the corner, and that is Empowered Living with Jeff Byrd. Jeff is the owner of Jeff Byrd Coaching, and he will be coming to you weekly to teach you more about empowered living. Now, let's join Jeff already in the studio.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeff Byrd with Jeffrey Byrd Coaching, and this is Empowered Living. Now, the title of our broadcast today is When Improving Yourself Isn't the Answer. Now, for those of you who've heard me before, you may think that's an unusual title, and it is somewhat unusual because if you know me, you know that I'm a huge advocate of personal growth and development. I think we should always be getting better. We should always be improving ourselves. Hopefully every day that we live is better than the last day, that we're learning new things and we're growing and we're becoming more on the inside and becoming more on the outside. But there is a time when improving ourselves is not the answer. And maybe you'll relate to this. This has been part of my experience. And the time that improving ourselves won't fix the problem is when another person is actually the problem. We can never get good enough that another person is going to be okay who isn't taking responsibility for themselves being okay. The thought says that, hey, I believe that if I improve enough, they'll get better. And that doesn't happen. Another person has to want to get better themselves, or they'll never improve. You can never improve yourself enough for someone else to get better. And this can be tough in a relationship. Part of my experience was growing up. I had a parent that they were loving in very many ways. And the older I get, the more I see their value. But they didn't improve themselves very much. They kind of had the idea that, hey, my life will be good. My life will be better when everybody else around me gets how I want them to be. And that applied to me as a child, too, in their thinking. And so what it did to me was it caused me to believe that, hey, I can never do well enough. I can never be enough. I've just failed. I just had a sense of failure from a very young age that really poisoned a whole lot of my decisions and a lot of what I did until I kind of began to get a hold on this. That mindset, if you think of it, another person has that expectation of you that, hey, you need to be this and be this way and do this in order for me to be happy. And you believe it, and then you can never do enough. It can lead to depression, to burnout, and to a sense of disesteem, of devaluing. You'll come to the belief that, hey, my best is never enough, therefore I'm not enough. If someone else puts a lot of their life responsibility on you and says, hey, I'm going to be okay when you become everything I expect you to be, and it's never enough. That mentality never leads to a sense of having enough or being fulfilled. So that's the first thing I want to share, is that we need to get rid of the thinking that if I improve, they'll get better. And I know so many other people who have experienced this too. They come from a difficult background, a difficult family background, and they're conscientious and they want things to be good and they try so hard. But what they do is they take on responsibilities that were never theirs in the first place, because they were really belonged to the other people. And they try so hard and they get disappointed so frequently, and it's really a shame. And what needs to happen is we need to have a showdown with this sense of inadequacy and this sense of finding out who's really responsible for what. What am I truly responsible for? And what are they responsible for? And that leads us to point number 2, which is putting responsibility where it belongs. Putting the responsibility where it belongs. I'm responsible for certain things. There's no doubt about it. I'm responsible for my growth, for my development, for my attitude, for my character. But they are also responsible for theirs. And they can't take on responsibility for mine, and I can't take on responsibility for theirs. Now, there's a verse in Scripture, and it says that we should bear one another's burdens, okay? But then a sentence or two later, it says, but we should each bear our own burden. And I thought, well, that seems like a contradiction. So I looked up those words for burden. And when it says we should bear one another's burdens, what that means is an excessive weight that's too much for one person. What it referred to was a long time ago when they would carry goods from a market to home, and they didn't have trucks and cars and things that they could carry them in, so they had to carry them. So a lot of times they would take these very heavy burdens and they would like carry them from a strap around their forehead or on top of their heads even. And maybe you've seen pictures of countries where that still happens. But the burden was so heavy they could not lift it up into place by themselves. They had to have other people help them because it was too heavy for one person. So when other people have burdens that are too heavy for one person alone to bear, that's when we need to help. That's when we need to get involved. But then the other one is that other word when it says each person must carry their own burden. What that means is a normal burden, a normal everyday type burden that an individual can carry by themselves. The problem is when we get around people who don't want to carry it by themselves. They want us to carry it for them. And if as children and growing up, we were made to think that that was our responsibility, all kinds of problems come in. We have resentment, we could have rebellion, we can have guilt, we can even end up with a sense of shame, which says that, hey, I'm a mistake, I'm not enough. Just my best isn't good enough, and therefore I carry this sense of failure, this sense of shame, this sense of, I'm just not good to anybody. And that's a terrible thing to carry around with you, and I speak from experience on that. So we need to realize when we are dealing with the responsibilities, what's my responsibility to help with, what's my responsibility toward myself, and what's their responsibility toward themselves. We need to realize that we all have room to improve. There's no doubt about that. Every single person has room to improve. We can all get better no matter how good we are. So we all have room to improve, and so do they. Whoever that person is that's putting their burden on me, or whoever yours is that's putting their burden on you, they have room to improve. And sometimes the way that we need to improve is by addressing the issues with them that they need to improve. Boundaries, learning how to say, no, I love you, but I'm not going to do that for you. You have to do that. Giving them a remedial, a prescriptive action that they can take, and then seeing if they will do it. Something that they're capable of doing, something that they need to do. And then if they refuse to do it, then their rebellion is unmasked. And they've shown us, hey, no, I just don't want to do it for myself. I want somebody else to do it for me. I'm a victim in my own mind. And then I'm often blaming other people. But we need to put that back on them and realize that really sometimes the major way we need to improve is by addressing the issues with them. This was part of my life for a long, long time. I thought I had to do everything for everybody. I thought it was my responsibility. And I had a group of friends one time, and one of them told me, in a kind of honest moment, they said, Jeff, we love being around you because anytime we need anything, we just mention it to you and you take care of it. And I thought to myself, that's the last time that's ever going to happen. I'm not going to take care of everybody else's stuff anymore. I'm going to take care of my stuff. I'm going to help them if I can and if they're open to it in the appropriate ways. But they're going to take care of their stuff. I'm not doing everything for everybody anymore. Now, here's another caveat of that responsibility part, is that when it comes to that, sometimes we don't need to address it directly if the person isn't open to us. If they're not open to that, then it may be that all we're going to do is just get in a big, long fight. So if it's somebody who's really important, who we have to continue to go along with, then sometimes what we can do is just take that burden to God and say, okay, listen, I can't do this for them. I can't make them see, and I'm not going to keep engaging them and take the focus off of what I need to be doing. I'm going to do the things that I need to do, and I'm going to trust you to do with them what needs to be done. I've seen this work so many times. If we continue to take up that responsibility for them, then we end up just getting in a tornado there with them and not doing the things we need to do ourselves. So we need to just entrust them to God and say, okay, you deal with them, you take care of this. I'm going to go do what I need to do. Now, another dynamic I'd like to mention, this is point number 3, is that we need to understand the balance between guilt and blame. If you picture it like a scale, like the old balance scales, where you had the 2 dishes on either side of the scale, often when we feel guilty about something, until we address it, what we'll do to try to balance that guilt is blame other people. Because if I can find a reason, something to blame them for that justifies my actions or my failure, then I can try to bring that guilt up by weighing down the other side of the scale with blame. And people, what I found is that people often the most in need of change themselves feel that everybody else is to blame for their situation. Instead of taking responsibility and addressing, their responsibility for their thoughts, for their words, for their actions, for their motives, for their attitudes, what they'll do is say, okay, I'm not going to deal with me because it's everybody else's fault. And if you find somebody who's just always focused on other people, always focused on what's wrong with them, always blaming them, probably there may be some things that they're guilty about that they need to address and take responsibility for, that they're trying to balance out. Very, very important dynamic to understand. It'll explain a whole lot of things about other people if you can understand that guilt and blame balance. And the problem is that if we do that, and we've all probably done it ourselves as well as knowing other people who have, then if we do that, if we're not really getting rid of the guilt by blaming others, now we're living with guilt and blame. We've got two problems now. We just added to our problems. We didn't get rid of any problem. The way to go back is to go back and own what we need to be responsible for in order to get rid of our guilt, admit it, ask for forgiveness if we need to. Then when it comes to blaming other people, we need to also forgive them for any legitimate thing they've done to us. Now, sometimes it's easy to come up with things that aren't legitimate things. They didn't do anything wrong. We're just trying to find something to excuse ourselves by. We need to get rid of both of those, both the guilt and the blame. Now, it's like, I think of it sometimes it's like a spotlight. It's like if the spotlight's on us, we don't want to deal with what the spotlight reveals, so we just try to turn the spotlight and put it on somebody else, and that never works. It doesn't free us from our issue that we need to be responsible for, and it just points to them, and then everybody else that's watching knows what we're doing. They know, wow, they're just not going to be responsible for that, so it minimizes us in their eyes. Now, another part of that is if somebody is blaming us for something, we do need to ask the question. We need to discern if there's truly something for us to address in ourselves. Even if they're not presenting it well, even if they have a bad attitude, even if they're a person who just tends to blame everybody, maybe there's a nugget of truth in that blame that's something that I could take responsibility for and improve and become better myself, whether they do or not. So we need to discern there. Sometimes even a person with a bad attitude is saying something that's true. There's some truth in, a kernel of truth, a grain of truth in there that I need to understand and address in myself. And then I can grow, I can develop, I can take away any true thing that they're blaming me for. So then all they're left with is themselves or a false blame. So if we can correct that thing, we should. Once we see that, we should make it right. We should admit it. We should own it. We should work to improve that. But if there's nothing to correct, all we can do is just, again, trust them to God, love them in appropriate ways, trusting the change to come at the right time while we do what we need to do. Okay? So that's where we are there. Taking responsibility for what we can be responsible for, and then leaving the responsibility for them on their shoulders, not taking their burden and bringing it to ourselves. Next is if we're in a position to address the dynamic. And sometimes there's a dynamic like this, but people are open. They really do want to grow. We should address that in a humble spirit, realizing that, hey, we make mistakes ourselves, and it may free them up and help them see. For example, I have a friend who's the director of an assisted living facility. Some people think of them as retirement communities. The proper name is assisted living facility. And but she had a young woman come in who was one of her staff members, and this woman just had a bad attitude. She came from a rough area in another state, and she was just brusque. She was offending people just by her mannerism. And what happened is the director realized, hey, I can't let this go on. This is offending people. It's going to cause a whole lot of other problems and bad attitudes in other people. So what she did is she called her into her office, and she said, hey, this is who we are. This is how we treat each other.